Hi everybody, we're back with our next lesson, and today we're going to be talking about something you're going to see for a long time. It's called the quadratic formula. So look at this quadratic formula. Now I have been using this equation, okay, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And this is for a basic quadratic equation. Okay, so how do we know we're looking at a basic quadratic equation? It's set equal to 0. Okay, and here it looks like a trinomial. So most important, we see here our highest exponent is 2. Okay, which means there's going to be 2 solutions, right? And you've seen that with completing the square and factoring. You're seeing your 2 solutions. Okay, so I want you to take note of these 3 letters: your A, your B, and your C. Okay, your A value is just the number coefficient in front of your x squared term. Your B value is the coefficient in front of your x term, and your C value is the constant. Okay, so here is the quadratic formula. And a lot of people sing it like Pop Goes the Weasel. I will do it for you. So it's x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And we used to sing it like that and make the kids memorize it like Pop Goes the Weasel because it was not on the reference sheet. But best news ever, you don't need to memorize the formula. It would be given to you on any reference sheet, on any lesson, if you were taking the regions on the regions. So here's what you need to know. There's pretty much 2 ways you're going to do quad formula. Either they're going to ask you to do the quadratic formula and they're going to tell you to use simplest radical form, or they're going to tell you to use quadratic formula and they're going to tell you to round to the nearest 10th or 100th. So you have to just be prepared. The great news about the quadratic formula is that it can be used to solve any quadratic equation. So let's say you can't factor something and you can't figure out the factors. You could put it into the quadratic formula and still get the answers you would get if you factored. Let's say you can't understand how to complete the square. You could put your quadratic equation into standard form, put your A, B, and C in to this equation, and you could get out your solutions. So this formula will literally help you with any quadratic equation. But remember, it must be quadratic, which means your highest exponent has to be 2. So the most important thing I could say is I'm going to give you just these little steps. You must get the equation into standard form, which is equal to 0. You're going to find the A and the B and the C value, which are coefficients. A, B, and C can't have variables next to it. You're plugging in a number for A, a number for B, and a number for C. So I'm just going to make a little note. A, B, and C are numbers, not variables. Okay, so you're not putting any x's into this equation. Okay, so then you're going to plug into your formula. You're going to simplify each piece. I'm going to show you that. If it's as simple as radical form, you have to simplify your radical. And then if the numbers all have a common factor, we're going to divide out, which we're going to talk about. Okay, so in the first few pieces, I'm going to ask you guys to do simplest radical form. Okay, so I am going to explain that, but I'm going to take it one step at a time. So in the first example, you're going to say to yourself, okay, is it in standard form? Is it equal to 0? Yes. Okay. So now we're going to find A, B, and C. Okay. So your A, your B, and your C values are, once again, take a look. They're the numbers in front of x squared, x, and your constant. So what's the number here in front of x squared? You don't see anything, which means it's a 1. What's the number? I'm going to make it a new color. What's the number in front of your B value, which is right there, your x term? Look what number is there. It's a negative 3. Okay, that's your b value, not the x, just your negative 3. And then I'm going to go new color. I'll say c, which is right there. Your constant here is a negative 1. So that's one of the hardest parts, just being able to recognize the a value, the b value, and the c value. So now I'm going to write my formula. And again, you don't have to memorize it. You're just going to rewrite it. It's x equals, okay, and now look, negative b plus or minus the square root. This b value, I always put it inside parentheses. That b is being squared. On all of your lessons, I'm going to be checking to make sure that b value is in parentheses. It's b squared minus 4 times a times c. Not the x equals, but from negative b all the way across to the c under the radical goes over 2a. Okay, and there is your formula. X equals negative b plus or minus your square root, b squared minus 4ac, all over 2a. So now, I want you to take note of the first thing that's happening to the b value. Does everybody see this? This b value, what's happening to it? It's being negated. So here, what's my b value? My b value is going to be negated, but what am I actually plugging in for b? Up top, it was a negative 3. Okay, does everybody see that? So I have to negate the negative 3. Then I'm going to do plus or minus my square root. Okay, and in parentheses, once again, my b value is negative 3, and I'm going to square it. And I'm going to do minus 4 times a, which was 1, and c, which was negative 1. And that entire thing is going to be over 2 times a value 1. Okay, so you need to soak that in a second. We literally took out the a, the b, and the c. There's no more a, b, and c. Do you notice? There's no more letters. My b value, my a value, my c value, my a value all have numbers. Where did I get those numbers? From up here. Where did I get those numbers? Straight from the equation. The 1 is in front of the x squared, that's your a. Your negative 3 is in front of x, that's your b. And your c is negative 1, that's your constant term at the end. Okay. So now we're going to simplify. So now I have negate negative 3. It's always going to become the opposite sign, which is a positive 3. I'm going to open up my radical. If I hold too long, it becomes weird. And then I'm going to make my denominator just 2 times 1. So what did I do? I left out underneath the radical. So I'm going to go new color, orange. Everybody sees this? Underneath that radical is going to go straight into your calculator, okay? Enter each piece into the calculator. So this piece is the number under the radical. So watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to pull up GeoGebra, clear out everything I have. The most important thing I'm going to say to you, don't type the radical. Why are we not typing the radical? Because look at my next line. It still has the radical in it. So I'm literally just going to type what I see under the radical. Okay, so most important, I'm going to say plug numbers into your calculator without radical. So watch what I'm going to do. Parenthesis. I'm going to show negative 3. I'm going to come out of it squared. Minus 4 times 1, just how I see it. And then another parenthesis, negative 1. And look at my number, 13. That's my number that goes under the radical, okay? There was no radical that I typed in there. And now I'm pretty much done. Here's why. This said simplest radical form. Can the 13 be simplified? Nope. that is your answer. So technically, if I were going to type this into a calculator, you could type it two ways. There are two solutions. 3 plus radical 13 over 2, and 3 minus radical 13 over 2. Okay, does everybody see those two solutions? Remember, you will always get two solutions. That plus and minus helps you see those two solutions. Okay, so I have 3 plus radical 13 over 2, 3 minus radical 13 over 2. All right, let's try it again. So the first thing I want you to do is notice, is it in standard form? Yes, equal to 0. So let's state our A, our B, our C. A value, 1. B value, 6. C value, 7. Okay? Okay, so now I'm going to write my formula. X equals negative B plus or minus our square root. I'm always putting that B in parentheses, squared, minus 4 times A times C, and that whole thing is over 2 times A. Okay, so again, you don't have to memorize that. You're going to come up to the top. You're going to write it down. And now I'm going to show my plug-in. I'm going to negate my B value. Here my B value is positive 6, so I'm just going to now negate positive 6, and it becomes negative 6. So notice, when B was negative in the last example, it became a positive 3, because it was negating a negative. Here, if my B value is a positive 6, it's now going to be a negative 6, because I'm negating it. Now I'm going to show plus and minus. I'm going to do 6 squared minus 4 times, okay, I come to a letter, A. What's my A? 1. Come to another letter, C. What's my C? 7. And it's all over 2 times another letter, A, which is 1. Okay, so let's clean this up. I like to clean it up into 3 pieces. Negative 6, plus or minus. Some number is going to go under that radical, and then I'm going to have my 2. Where did I get my 2? 2 times 1. So here's where I'm going straight to my calculator. You see this? This piece right here is going to go into your calculator. So I'm going to pull this up, okay, and I'm going to make that smaller so I could see no radical. I'm going to type in a parenthesis, 6 squared, minus 4, times in a parenthesis 1, exactly how I see it, and then in another parenthesis 7. Okay, and there's my number, 8. My number that I'm going to put off to the side, I'm going to get rid of that, is an 8. Okay, so here's where it gets tough. I wish I had more room. This number 8, what did I always used to say? I hate radical 8. This radical 8 can be simplified. In other words, it is not in simplest radical form, which is what we need here, simplest radical form. So you have to say to yourself, okay, I can simplify this into 2 numbers where one of them is a perfect square. What 2 numbers multiply to 8 where one of them is a perfect square? 4 and 2. Because remember, this radical 4 can be now simplified. So what does that become? That becomes x equals negative 6 plus or minus 2 radical 2 over 2. Okay, so I'm going to put it over here so you could see it. X equals negative 6 plus or minus 2 radical 2 over 2. And now you see this little part here, which we haven't gotten to yet. If all numbers, no radical, have a common factor, you have to divide out that common factor. So I want you to take note of these 3 numbers. It has to be 3. The negative 6, the 2, and the 2. Not the radical 2. You are not allowed to simplify underneath that radical 2. The radical is simplified already. But if there's a number that can go into all 3, you must simplify it. So what number goes into 6, negative 6, 2, and 2? You should be saying to yourself, oh, 2 goes into all three. So if I divide each of these by 2, okay, I'm going to make a little note. This one, this one, this one. Divide by 2. I get x equals negative 3 plus or minus 1 radical 2 over 1. Now, how else can I write that? Negative 3 plus or minus radical 2. Technically, I don't need the 1 in front of the radical, and I don't need the 1 over the radical. You could put it there, but you don't have to use it. You don't have to put a fraction over 1, and the 1 radical 2, that's like a coefficient of 1, which you don't need. Now, if that negative 3 in the front, if this number was a 1, you would need it. You would need 1 plus or minus rad 2. But here you have two solutions. Negative 3 plus radical 2 and negative 3 minus radical 2. So those are your solutions for number 2. Sorry that it went past what you're saying. Okay. We needed more room here. Okay, so let's do 3. Okay, that was a lot to soak in, right? These aren't easy. What's up with numbers 3 and 4? Number 3 should be very obvious. They don't look like 1 and 2. In number 3, it's not in standard form. So I need to move something to get it equal to 0. What would I move? What color am I going to use? I'm going to go green. I'm going to move that 4. So I would subtract 4 from both sides. Now, when you subtract 4 from this side, I keep my 2x squared, I keep my 9x, and then I minus 4. So notice the negative 4 and the 9x are not like terms. Don't combine them. Now you could tell me the value of A, B, and C. A is just the number 2. Here it is. B is the number 9. And C, the sign goes with it, is a negative 4. So I'm going to write my formula. X equals negative B plus or minus my square root of B squared minus 4AC. And that whole thing is over 2A. Okay? So now we're going to plug in our numbers. Now remember, whatever the value of B is, it's going to switch the sign. So it's positive 9. I'm going to negate positive 9, and it's going to become negative 9. Plus or minus, okay, so now I have 9 squared minus 4 times A value, 2. C value, negative 4. And that's over 2 times our A value of 2. So now I like to clean it up and show my 3 pieces. Here's my pieces. My negative 9, my radical, and my denominator is going to have a 4. Does everybody see that? Because 2 times 2 gave me my 4. So now I'm going into GeoGebra. Okay, I'm going to clear out what I had, and I am going to be using this. Whatever's under that radical is what I need to type in. So I have 9 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 4. So let me say this to you. If you ever get a number that is negative, you did something wrong. That number is 113. There's your number. It should be positive. Okay, so now that's a tough number. If we're going simplest radical form and I'm getting a number like 113, okay, I got to figure out, are there any numbers that multiply to 113 where one of them is a perfect square? So watch what I'm going to type in. 113 divided by x. Okay, why? That's going to give me a table of values. So I'm going to go anywhere from I guess I can go from like negative 20 to positive 20. Give me a whole bunch of numbers. Are there any numbers that I could see where one of them is a perfect square that it goes in? So like 4, nope, doesn't go in evenly. 9, no, doesn't go in evenly. 16, nope, doesn't go in evenly. So I guess I really want to maybe even make my numbers go further, like up to, let's just say 100. So 25 doesn't go in evenly. Look, 25, 4.52. You're going to realize that 113 is prime. There's no numbers that are going to divide evenly into 113. Okay, which means this is in simplest form. The good news is you're done. There's 2 answers here. 9 plus radical 113 over 4 and 9 minus radical 113 over 4. Those are your 2 answers. Okay, you could technically leave it like this. X equals, like those are your answers, or you could write them out as 2 solutions. Just know there are 2 solutions. Okay. All right, get all your questions ready for me. I'll be able to answer questions whenever you want. Okay, so look at number 4. So important we talk about number 4. In number 4, you see your x squared term? This is your x squared term. That x squared term must be positive. Okay, keep it positive. So in other words, you're going to move the 4x and the 3 to the other side. Don't move the 2x squared to the other side. It's just a little bit confusing when your a value is negative. So keep your a value, which here is 2x squared, positive, and then keep your minus 4x minus 3, and that would equal 0, because those are going to zero out. So now once you have that, you could tell me your a value, your b value, your c value. A is 2, b is negative 4, c is negative 3. So now I'm going to write my formula. X equals negative b plus or minus my square root, b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And I'm going to plug in. Now my b value is negative 4. So when I negate negative 4, I'm going to wind up with a positive there. My b value, once again, is negative 4. I'm going to square it. Minus 4 times a is 2, and c is negative 3. And that's over 2 times a, which is 2. So from here, I like to clean it up. Becomes a positive 4, a plus or minus. I'm going to leave the radical blank for a second, and I'm going to put a 4 on my denominator, 2 times 2. And I'm going to do that because when I now go to the calculator to figure out what is going to be that number under the radical. Okay, so I'm going to clear out what I had here. No radical, I type negative 4 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 3. Again, it shouldn't be negative, which it isn't. It's a positive 40. Okay, so my number under my radical is a 40. Now, can 40 be simplified? You have to ask yourself, okay, is there a number that goes into 40? I don't know why it's doing that. Let me just go back in. Yes, what 2 numbers multiply to 40 where one of them is a perfect square? Hopefully you're saying 4 and 10. Don't use 8 and 5. Neither are perfect squares. So watch how I write this. The 4 comes first, the 10 comes second, stays over 4. Why does this one come first? Okay, just make note. It's the perfect square. So what happens to the perfect square? I'm going to again rewrite this without the radical. The square root of 4 is 2. Okay, but now this can still be simplified. You're only allowed to do this if all 3 numbers, not the radical, this number, and this number. What number can go into 4, 2, and 4? Kids will say 4, but you can't divide 4 into 2. Divide by 2. So that would give you 2 plus or minus 1 rad 10 over 2. and that's your answer. I could write it as 2 plus rad 10 over 2, 2 minus rad 10 over 2. A lot of kids will then say, oh, can I simplify the 2's? No, you are only allowed to simplify when all three numbers are simplified. So you would have to have a number that goes into 2, 1, and 2, and no number besides 1 goes into 2, 1, and 2, which means you can't go any further. These are your answers. You could write it literally just like this, or you could separate it into 2 pieces. Okay, so now here's the huge difference with what we've been doing and number 5. What does number 5 say? To the nearest 10th. So you are no longer going to do simplest radical form. When you get to this point up here, okay, you're going to go straight to the calculator. So I'm going to show you this. This one very nicely is already in simplest form, or I shouldn't say simplest form, standard form. In other words, I could state A, B, and C. A is 4, B is 7, and C is -5. Okay, so everybody should see 4, 7, -5. So I'm going to write x equals -b plus or minus my square root of b squared minus 4ac. And that's all over 2 times a. Okay, so now I do my plug-in. I'm going to negate b, which is 7, plus or minus 7 squared minus 4 times a, which is 4, and c, which is -5. That's all under the radical, and that's over 2 times a, which is 4. So I like to do my cleanup. 3 pieces. Piece 1 is this. Piece 2 is the radical. Piece 3 is the denominator, right? So I'm going to have -7 plus or minus a number under my radical over here. It's an 8. 2 times 4 is 8. So I'm going to go into my calculator to get me whatever number that is under the radical. Notice I don't hit the radical button. I do parenthesis 7 squared minus 4 times 4 times -5. Okay, and I get that number, 129. That's my number that goes under the radical. Now here's the best news ever. Because it says to the nearest 10th, you don't need to simplify anything. At this point, okay, because it's rounding, you're going to go straight to calculator. Now here's the deal. You have to break it into 2 solutions. In other words, x equals -7 plus radical 129 over 8, and x equals -7 minus radical 129 over 8. So we're going to go into the calculator to get those 2 answers. So watch this. I'm going to clear out what I have, and I'm going to immediately hit the division sign. It's going to make my answer a fraction. -7 goes in the numerator. First plus radical 129. Use your little arrow key to get down to the bottom. Over 8. And look at that number. Here's my first number. 0.544727, right? And it's irrational. And they want it to the nearest 10th. Okay, so understand, this is the 10th place. Look to the right. That makes it 0.5 as one of your answers. Because when you look to the right, the 4 tells the 5 to stay a 5. Okay, so we're going to do that again. We're going to say, okay, now let's do hit division sign again to make it a fraction. -7 minus radical 129. And I'm putting that in the denominator over 8. There's my other number. So notice they don't have to be the exact same number, 1 plus 1 minus. This happens to be -2.29472. 29472 29472 dot dot dot. Okay, so if I'm rounding once again to the nearest tenth, this is the number in the tenths place. Look at the number to the right, it's a 9. That makes that next number go up 1, so it becomes negative 2.3. And those are your two solutions. You could show it as a solution set as negative 2.3 and 0.5. The order of them does not matter because who cares? They're both x values. It's not an x and a y. Now let me say something else to you. How can I check to make sure? Like just showing a little double check. If I went into my calculator and I typed this original equation, 4x squared plus 7x minus 5. Don't even put in the equals 0. If it's equal to 0, you don't even have to do that. Okay, so there's your equation. And I want to know where my solutions are, my roots, my zeros. They're right here. Now look at that number. That first one on the left is a negative. There's my negative, 2.294727. That's exactly what we got. If I touch on the other one, it should be that 0.544. So you know you did it correct, okay? You could do that for any of your answers, especially when it's rounded to the nearest tenth. You could double check in your calculator to see. Okay, so this is a lot to take in. I did those 5 for you. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to let you practice, and then we'll do a practice day as well. Okay, let me know if you have questions.